Listen to the JT Sports Podcast on all podcasting platforms and leave a 5-star review.
Kentucky is going to be taking on Ole Miss. This game is going to be played this Saturday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN. Ole Miss currently is a 6.5-point favorite going into this matchup. And for the Rebels, their rushing attack has looked really dominant so far. They currently are averaging 296.7 rushing yards per game, which is second best in college football. But for Ole Miss, there still is a lot of uncertainty around this team. Right now, they're 4-0, but this Kentucky game is going to be their first true test of the season because Tulsa, Georgia Tech, Central Arkansas, Troy, no disrespect to those schools, but they aren't good. And when you look at Kentucky, defensively, they're pretty solid. Their run defense is pretty good. Their defensive line is pretty solid against the run as well. And for Ole Miss, their ground game is really good. However, you would love to see them replicate the success that they've had so far in their first 4 games in this game against Kentucky. Now, their offensive line is really talented, and their running back room is mega talented. I mean, Quinshon Judkins is a true freshman running back, and he currently leads the team in rushing. You have Zach Evans, transferred from TCU. He also is having a pretty good season up to this point. So I expect Ole Miss to have success on the ground against Kentucky. Now, are they going to have, 300 yards on the ground? Highly unlikely. But I do expect Ole Miss to probably be around 140, 150 rushing yards in this game. However, if you are a Kentucky fan, you're saying, JT, Kentucky's defense is going to stack the box and force Jaxson Dart to beat them through the air. Because Jaxson Dart hasn't looked all that good up to this point. And that is true. However, I do think that Jaxson Dart is going to get things clicking sooner rather than later. However, this run game is so dominant that Ole Miss doesn't really need a great performance out of Jaxson Dart. Now, if the run game gets taken away, then that's when they're going to need him to step up. However, I think that Kentucky's run defense, although it is a pretty good unit, I just think with the talent that Ole Miss has at running back, that rushing attack is going to be there at the disposal for Ole Miss. However, yes, the passing game so far for the Rebels has looked pretty shaky, pretty rocky. And you would love for the passing game to be a little bit more up to par when you're playing teams such as Georgia Tech and Central Arkansas and Troy and Tulsa. However, with having a new quarterback, we already know Matt Corral now in the NFL, they have a new starter in. So it's going to take a while for things to start getting going. And I do think that in this game, if Ole Miss has to lean on the passing attack to win, they could struggle. However, Kentucky doesn't have a good pass rush. They currently are 99th in America in sacks per game. And this defensive line, although they are really good against the run, they aren't really all that good against the pass. And for Jaxson Dart, if there was a game where he could fire on all cylinders and get things going, it could be against this defense. Because this pass rush going against this Ole Miss offensive line has to be there. Because you can say anything you want about Jaxson Dart, but if you give any at least average quarterback time to throw the football, they're going to make you pay. So for Kentucky, the pass rush has to be there in this game. You can't say, well, Jaxson Dart has been average, and then use that as a point for why you can win this game if you can't take advantage of that. How are you going to be able to take advantage of that if you can't get constant pressure on them? Because if you give him time to throw the football and time to sit back and dissect your defense, he's going to be able to do it. Because this was somebody who had a really good season when he was at USC. And right now, with him learning a new system and whatnot, it's still taking him a little bit of time to get into rhythm. But if you're Kentucky, you definitely don't want this to be the game when he gets into rhythm. But I do think for Ole Miss, however, the ground game has to be there if you want your best chance at winning this game. Because if you do have to lean on this passing attack, which still is a work in progress, that kind of puts you at a disadvantage in a sense. Because right now, we still don't really know what Lane Kiffin has at the quarterback position. We don't know if Jaxson Dart is good, great, bad, average. We don't know. So the jury's still out on them. Now, when you look at Kentucky, on the other hand, their offense, when it comes to the passing game, is really explosive. A question that I had about Kentucky going into this season was the production that they were going to have at wide receiver, because they lost Wan'Dale Robinson to the NFL. And I didn't really see anybody in this passing room who jumped out to me. However, over the course of the first 4 games for Kentucky, I've been proven wrong that Kentucky has nothing but depth and plenty of weapons to go around in the passing game. As a matter of fact, you could say that Kentucky has more talent at wide receiver this year than what they had last year, because last year pretty much was the Wan'Dale Robinson show. But this year, you just have so much talent and so much depth. And I think if you're Ole Miss's secondary and you're their defensive coordinator, you definitely have to be a little bit concerned. Because your secondary does have some talent. However, if you are Kentucky, I think that that's a pretty favorable matchup. Your wide receivers against the secondary of Ole Miss. And yes, you can say, well, JT, Ole Miss secondary has looked pretty decent in the first couple of games. Yes, they have, but they haven't really faced a passing attack in the quarterback this good until now, and Will Levis. And these wide receivers can do it all. They're really good with the ball in their hands. They also are really good when you want to send them downfield and push the field vertically. However, a concern of mine is the offensive line. The offensive line for Kentucky has been, to put it nicely, awful this season. And that's something that you don't really say about Kentucky that often. For like over the last, almost a decade, Kentucky has always had a really good offensive line. But this season, their offensive line has not been good. And it kind of was a little bit expected in a sense, because they did have some turnover on the coaching staff, some new faces on the offensive line. But given the history of success that Kentucky has had in the past when it comes to the performance of the offensive line, you kind of were giving them the benefit of a doubt. But this season, it looks like their offensive line definitely isn't good. And I don't think it's going to get any better. I mean, you gave up 5 sacks last week against Northern Illinois. You gave up 3 sacks against Youngstown State. And Ole Miss, this is a team that is really good at getting pressure on the quarterback. They're 5th in sacks per game. And you can say, well, JT, they're 5th in sacks per game against inferior competition. But this was an Ole Miss defense that was still really good at getting pressure on the quarterback last year in 2021. So for Kentucky, your offensive line is struggling in pass protection. And not only is your offensive line struggling to protect your quarterback, but they're also struggling to open up holes in the running lane. Kentucky's rushing attack has been awful this season. Now, a big reason for that not only just is the lackluster performance of the offensive line, but also the fact that they have been without their star running back, Chris Rodriguez, who currently is serving a suspension for a off-the-field related incident. However, he currently is eligible to return against Ole Miss October 1st, so he should be able to play in this game, and that should be an added boost for Kentucky's offense if he can play in this game, because I do think that him coming back in the fold is definitely going to help out your ground game. However, the run blocking definitely has to improve in this game, because their other running back that they had playing, he's not that bad. As a matter of fact, he's pretty solid. However, the run blocking isn't there. And it doesn't matter how good of a running back you are if your offensive line can't create holes for you to run through. And Kentucky is averaging 2.8 yards per carry. That's awful. That's abysmal. So for Kentucky's passing attack, they're averaging 10.1 yards per pass. Will Levis has one of the strongest arms in America. He has a all-star group of wide receivers around him. However, a big concern that I have when it comes to Will Levis is he going to be able to protect the football? Because in a game like this, I'm not expecting the blowout. Ole Miss has the kind of style of offense this year where they're going to take a lot of time off the clock. They're going to tire out your defense, and you're not going to have a lot of possessions, and every possession is going to matter because if you have one turnover, you may not touch the football for another 8 minutes or maybe another quarter. Let's say it's the middle of the third quarter, 6 minutes left, and Will Levis throws an interception and turns the football over. Ole Miss gets the football, and they're so dominant running the football that Kentucky may not touch the football again until 11 minutes left in the fourth quarter. So for Kentucky, you definitely cannot afford to turn the football over against a team like Ole Miss that is really good at running the football. And if you're Ole Miss, you can't afford to turn the football over. You can't afford to come up empty on possessions because you're taking all that time off the clock. You better put some points up on the board because what's the point of taking all that time off the clock just to come up empty? So the team that I'm going to take to win this game, I'm going to take Ole Miss to get the win. The reason why I'm going to take the Rebels to get this victory is because I think that the rushing attack is going to be there for Ole Miss. And Kentucky fans are going to be like, well, JT, I mean, Ole Miss hasn't really proved that the rushing attack is all that great against a good team. This is going to be the first good team they play, and I do understand that. However, it's not like Ole Miss doesn't have talent at running back. I mean, we know what Zach Evans can do. And their other true freshman running back has looked like a stud so far. So, I mean, the talent at running back is going to be there. The offensive line is really good. And on top of that, Kentucky's run defense allowed 136 yards against Florida not too long ago. And Florida has a really good group of running backs and also a good rushing attack themselves. And if Florida would have had better quarterback play out of Anthony Richardson, Florida probably would have won that game. And you can also attribute part of Anthony Richardson's poor performance to how good Kentucky's defense played in that game. But I definitely think that Jaxson Dart definitely can perform a lot better than how Anthony Richardson did against Kentucky, because Anthony Richardson also had a poor performance to USF. So for Kentucky, I just think that their defense is pretty solid, but I just think that the ground game for Ole Miss just is so good that I think they're going to be able to control the time of possession, take time off the clock, and I think that the pass rush is going to be able to get enough pressure on Will Levis and force a couple of mistakes, and they should be able to win this game. I'm going to take the Rebels to win. 24-14 is my final score prediction for this game.